Hello, everybody. I'm Jess Kofel. Normally, I'm on here with my lovely wife, Lindsay, and tonight she is not feeling well, so I'm going to be doing this all by myself. So, sorry to anybody that I offend or don't do this properly, but this will be just me tonight. So, the topic that the question was sent into tonight was how can I make the most out of winter riding? And for anybody that doesn't know where we're at, we are in southwestern Ontario. Definitely not the coldest spot I've ever been in the winter, but it does get cold here, and it's a whole different thing training horses when it's cold and training people when it's cold. So, as everybody can tell by the steam coming out when I'm breathing, and it is fairly cold here. I don't know, I think it's about -2 tonight. So we're going to talk about ways to keep riding, ways to keep active, way to keep our horses and the people going forward so they're ready for the springtime when you can ride a lot. Main reasons we want to keep going is the horses are healthier, the people are healthier, and you'll have way less injuries to horses if you bring them back and they've been rode a little bit all winter and they've kept into a program and they've kept going. Some common things that happen, especially in southwest Ontario or anywhere in the north, is whether or not you have an indoor arena is a big one. If you have access to an arena all the time, that's fairly easy. Keep your horses healthy, keep riding them as much as possible, keep consistent, and that's a huge deal. Main things that I look for when we're riding something in the winter is I don't want to be intermittent with them. I want to do 5-6 times a week of some sorts. Just like everything, they got to stay healthy. Some common problems I see, though, is people will, around here, is they'll bring horses in for their lesson, let's say, and common thing I say is, hey, do you want to lunge your horse for a minute? Oh no, he's been outside all the time, he'll be fine. And the shocker always is they finally get on dry dirt and they're not okay. They're full of energy, they haven't been running, they've been out on the ice in the snow, they're not playing around the same way. So then the horse takes off, goofs around, muscle and tendon and ligament injuries are bigger because it's cold out. And you got to think of the horses the same way as you do a person. If you play a sport in the summertime or you play a sport in the wintertime, your warm-ups have to be different. Your warm-ups have to accommodate for the fact that you're just colder. We all bundle ourselves up, which is great, but we don't do the same for their legs, and that's a problem. You're going to hurt your horses, and then rehab time is huge. So that's a big problem. The shout out for tonight is Lacey, who's out the other side of Ontario for us, who sent my wife a nice message for about keeping everybody together and making Rainable accessible. To the grassroots part of it, and everybody can keep going. Thank you, Lacey, for sending that to Lindsay. So the big thing we're going to get into, how do we make the most of winter riding? Don't do it once a week and expect your horse to be the same. It's such a huge, huge thing we tell everybody. Don't come in for a once a week lesson, especially in the summertime, and you think, well, my horse is capable of running circles or stopping, so many feet. You have to understand that they have their limitations because it is wintertime and their physical conditioning is less. The biggest injury to horses in the wintertime is when the people think that they can still ride the same horse that they had in the summer that they were showing or riding all the time. And we see it a lot, especially when people work cattle. They think, well, I'm only going to go in and do a couple minutes, my horse isn't in that good a shape, but he'll be a big K for a couple months. It's not the heart rate that we worry about near as much as the legs, the tendons, the ligaments, all that stuff put together. So you really want to warm them up. When we work cows here in the wintertime, if there's let's say 4 or 5 in the arena, the person before the person that's working, I always have them like trot a lot. Trot, move them horses around, keep their limbs limber, keep them warmed up. So, and a lot of people, it's tricky to ride in the winter time. Through the week, it gets dark earlier, and that's just the way it is. But you just have to know your limitations. We do a lot more long trotting in the winter. Keep those joints moving to the full extent. Keep their legs moving, and really stretch them out. Just because you trot a horse around doesn't mean you're, making them physically stretch their joints, stretch out, and really use the full range of motion. So we like to long trot a lot. We do it as a big warm-up and cool-down exercise, and we do that a lot more. One thing that we try to encourage people to do in the winter is pick something new. If you got, let's say, a reiner, put them in the ranch ride. If you got a ranch rider, maybe try some cows. Maybe a couple people this winter have, expressed some interest in teaching their horses to rope a little bit and do some stuff with the expectation that they might not really be rope horses, or they might not ever want to really pursue that a lot, but just being able to teach them horses to drag something, to pull it around, a new skill set is a great time to do that in the wintertime. Some people are not able to stay riding through the winter, just accessible to indoor arenas, or, if you ice over your outdoor arena. There's ways to still stay involved. You think of it as when you go out in the spring, what's going to be your biggest drawback? It's going to be physical fitness is the biggest one. Make sure you can cater a little bit of working, your body to that. Just because you go to the gym doesn't mean it's the same group of muscles that you would have when you ride. So that's a big one, so that when you do go out in the spring, you're physically prepared to go do that. For many years, everybody can see behind me, we have an indoor arena. I have one now. I don't ride outside hardly at all in the winter time. We didn't have one growing up, and we rode outside all the time. You learn really quick to bundle up. Watch your horses breathing. Don't get them super super winded down. And the best thing, you can get them really broke. Like we can take those reiners, or we used to before we had the indoor arena. We'd go change leads. We'd go do everything outside. Take those sides of the roads and, just go loping. Being on them horses is so good to keep them going. The one thing that I do caution everybody about when they bundle right up is anybody who's been here in the wintertime, once it gets to be about -4, -5, or maybe a little colder than that, is I ride all winter in a pair of Carhartt bib overalls where, they're insulated, and they got some, you can get insulated jeans now and all that kind of stuff. Do whatever it takes. But I do caution, I use the Carhartts with, they have the right material. The one thing I do really, really caution everybody about, don't use wind pants that are that plasticky material. Boy, they make a horrible sound, and you can sure get some of them horses just a little worried. And they slip around a little more too. The insulated coveralls and all the insulated jeans, the insulated jeans have sure gotten a lot better over the years, and keep everything warm, that's for sure. When we used to ride outside, we'd have balaclavas on, and now I have the insulated coveralls. And another real good one that I like is the silk scarves. I don't have one on today because I'm pretty much always with a hoodie, but the silk scarves are a great deal. for staying warm, any of that kind of stuff, and you'll just find what works for you. I don't know, my go-tos is you can go to Costco and you get really nice insulated leather gloves that have the elastic bands around the wrists. I forget what they are, like a 3-pack. They're expensive. They're 20 some bucks a pair, but boy, they're a really good glove, and that elastic band keeps everything warm. My Carhartt bib overalls, those are a go-to all the time. And as everybody can tell, my fancy toques, and I don't wear cowboy hats much in the winter time, so it sure changes how you ride, but bundle up, and definitely the same for the horses. If you're just going out for a ride, and you're just going to walk down the road, and I'm a big one on stick a cooler over them. Keep them bundled up too. And it's harder because in the summertime we're more apt to wrap legs, do stuff like that. In the wintertime when there's snow and everything, it's hard to wrap them properly and keep them warm as you're riding them. And that's where you just have to use your brain a little bit. Don't get those horses in trouble when they're cold out. Don't just go ahead and, goof off down the road and hurt them. There's nothing worse than having something you got to, rehab up for the wintertime. I apologize. Somebody sent Lindsay a thing about wearing a balaclava and a set of goggles. Yeah, we used to do that all the time. I mean, that's, whatever you can do to stay warm, my gosh, go do it. The goggles are awesome. And I don't know what kind you have. We used to use like downhill skiing goggles. They seal up and they were big and you could see out of them in the winter. You could buy them cheap and they're awesome. If you're going to ride outside and you're dedicated to that stuff, and you can have a lot of fun. As a kid, I can remember pulling, we'd have a toboggan and some stuff behind the horses, and we'd pull them with the horses. I never was much for driving horses, the cutters and stuff, but boy, everybody can have fun doing that stuff. You can enjoy them horses a lot. Teach them to pull a cutter, get them out in the snow, But we used to pull the toboggans with them and do that kind of stuff, and you can have a lot of fun in the wintertime doing that. And the show horses benefit from it as long as they're being worked and out, and going. A good hint to when we take them show horses, this isn't for everybody, but when you get off with the show horses at the end of the year, don't rip their shoes off all the time. There's a bit of a myth that says, you pull them shoes off, it's better for the feet. It's baloney. If them horses are shod properly, you're actually better, and you can keep a better foot by shoeing them if the shoer is right and he's doing a good job. I think a lot of people say it's better for them more out of laziness to just say, well, I don't want to keep them shod. It's easier for me. In Ontario, it's, there's the muddy season there in October and November, and that's a little tough on shoes, but you manage it, and they're better for it if they keep shoes on. And not so much now with the indoor arena, but we used to, and I still shoe some that do this, is I would take the sliding plates and I'd put some screw-in corks in them. So if somebody wanted to go trail riding outside, they can, screw in we call them eventing corks or screw-in corks on the sliding plates. And then when they come into an indoor arena, you can take those corks out. There's lots of options, if you want to do it and really do it well. As far as dressing, whatever you'd wear out normally. Like I say, I'm a big Carhartt bib overalls. I likely won't take this toque off now until about March or April. The long underwear go on, good heavy sock, good quality socks. We have to do that in Ontario because it is what it is. You're going to be cold. So if you're going to be cold, you're going to be grouchy. Dress warm, do it properly. I will say that we don't have it. Everybody says, it's cold here, and it is. I mean, I can see my breath now and whatnot, but I spent a winter out in northern Minnesota. I've never been so cold in my life. That was horrible. Okay, so just a couple of, we'll see if I can rewind the questions because this is going to go real well. Lisa was just talking to Farrier today about putting shoes on for winter riding. You bet. You can put like a snow pad, like a rim pad keeps the snow out of them. And corks are a great thing. You know, I love the screw-in corks just because you can take them out when you want to be in an arena. But you can put borium, there's lots of things you can do to it to make that work. Just talk to your farrier what he's comfortable, or she, what they're comfortable doing. And, the horses always benefit from work. Same with people. So if you can keep them going, you won't be behind when you come in the winter. My wife's momentum deal, there's a bunch talking in there about so if you lay a horse off, you have to bring them back, and it takes so long to bring them back. And there's a lot of truth to that. So if you just keep them physically fit, it doesn't have to be that they have to be stopping or they have to be, spinning and all that stuff. They just have to be getting rode well with the same guidelines you would use in a person. It's still good to get outside when it's cold. You just don't, try to get as winded. You don't try to breathe in all that cold air all at once. You just got to take it easy, know where your physical fitness levels are, and then you're way better when it comes springtime. And there's a lot of talk about that. Lindsay's put a bunch of that up in the momentum as far as how to bring a horse back and how to use that. And physical conditioning is such a big thing when we go to these spring shows, and you'll see some horses that are out of shape, and that's such a dangerous thing to do to these horses. You got to have them in shape when they go to those first ones, so you try to ride them as much as you can. For me, I don't need them in peak shape, but I need them in good riding shape. I need to be able to ride them, and I need to be able to do stuff. Now, we cheat here because obviously we have the indoor arena behind us. Our training horses are all stalled. So, we have good blankets on them. Mine stay under lights, which keeps their hair coats a little better, so it's easier to keep the sweat off of them. If you have a horse that's maybe a little hairy and a little thick in the hair, you're going to be prepared to be there for a much longer period of time to cool that horse out. And don't dare ever throw one back out when it's cold. When their back is hot, you're going to have sore backs just the same as a person. It's exactly the same as a person. And that if you're sweating, you're out in the cold, it's going to suck. It's going to hurt them. It's going to be really hard on muscles. Invest in a good blanket. If you got a horse that maybe chews on blankets, or one of his buddy does, invest in, they have sprays for horses at cribs. Spray them blankets, but invest in a good blanket. And you can do a lot in the winter time. And I think it's important to keep those horses going a little bit in the winter time, even if you're not going to show them, even if you're not going to do stuff with them. Boy, keep them doing stuff. Keep them active. You don't use it, you lose it. I think for me, that's the biggest thing is, dress warm, keep them warm. And just, it seems silly to say, but just use your brain a little bit. What would you want done for you when you're out? It's okay to go cross-country skiing. You just have to make sure, if you get sweaty, you dry off. Do the same with the horses. And you just keep going that way. There's a lot of fun things you can do with them in the wintertime, aside from in the arenas. So even if you're maybe stuck outside and you don't have the ability to have that, put some corks on them so they're safe on if they do hit a little ice or a little even hard ground. It can be just like ice. And, teach them a new thing. Such a great thing for them horses to do. I don't know if anybody has questions on what we do. You're more than welcome to stick them up here. there's a, okay, Catherine Kosh, you mean blanket them outside or during cooling down? Both. So if you're going to ride them through the winter and they're housed outside, I think they should definitely be blanketed. It is a little tougher on them if they're not. Coolers as they're drying down so that it takes a lot of that moisture out of them. You take them coolers, you rub on them kind of like a towel when you get a shower. Get that moisture out of them before you put them out. As far as if they're housed in or out, there's benefits both ways. If they're inside, they're inside a barn, the air quality is never as great as if it is outside. Outside, there is more risks of them slipping on ice, depending on how they're housed. It's a tough gig. But you can do it, but definitely have multiple blankets. Have your big, heavy blanket to keep on them that's waterproof. Then when that starts to get a little warmer there in the spring, or even right now, it's not super, super cold yet, just have a good waterproof blanket with a little bit in there. And then have them coolers where not only do you just put them on there, but have a couple coolers to get that moisture off of that back. Get that moisture away from them quick as you can possibly do it. Another one that works really well is if you're going to ride a lot, is just have a heat lamp over wherever you unsaddle them or wherever you can tie them up. And put that heat lamp over their back for a little bit, and that's a real easy way to keep them warmed up until they get dry. Dry is that biggest key thing in there. Joy said, did you talk about cold and their lungs? When is it too cold? Does it affect length of time you ride? Is there too cold? Well, there is for me. Yeah, you get down to minus 20, it's tough on them. I always find right around minus 15, I really have to alter how I train on a horse. I don't think length of time needs to be as changed as the intensity in the length of time. So I can still stay on them babies when it's really cold out. And instead of loping a lot where I'm going to get them really puffing and blowing it or sucking in that cold air and really using their lungs, that is where I might come in and say, okay, I'm going to work a lot on side passing today. I'm going to really work on how this horse steps to the side or does this and do that. And I'll work more on a mental training than bringing in the physical part of it when it's that cold. So for me, when it gets to be anything below minus 15, I really change how I ride. And the same as anything over 30, 33 degrees. I couldn't even tell you what that converts into the American part, and I always forget that. But 33 degrees, it's dang hot. They struggle, and I definitely alter that a little bit. And then, like I say, minus 15 the other way. I'm going to work more on their brain than their body at that point, and I'm going to make sure I keep them really dry. And I think that's a big thing. Don't let them breathe in that cold air super hard. Just same as a person. You can hurt their lungs a little bit. Not a little bit. You can hurt them a lot. So don't get them doing those big breaths, but you can still work them and gain something by working them mentally more than physically. And that's personal preference. A lot of people just, they have different temperatures, but I feel like you just have to feel them out as you're riding them. And that's just knowing your horses, knowing, the work that you're giving them. Common things, know the arena you're in too. Know the kind of dirt you're on. If it's a little harder when it's wintertime, it's hard on joints. They're pounding on that hard dirt. A lot of people don't like to water their arenas near as much in the wintertime because it's hard because everything freezes. Well, you got to keep the dust down. So there's some products that you can use for that help dust. But you just got to know your horses. try to keep their breathing as best as possible, keep their joints as best. It's just like a person. If you're going to go run around right now, it's cold out. Your joints aren't as warmed up. You're not as apt to do that. So that's so important. Nancy put on here, check out skiing for clothing. Yes, the ski coats and all that stuff. The only thing I do caution about that is the pants. Those plasticky type waterproof stuff, that can get really dangerous. And that's why I like the Carhartt. It just has a little more feel like jeans. It doesn't make the sounds in the saddles. We ride babies, and there's been a lot of people over the years with those plastic ski pants that we just say, hey, why don't you just put a different pair on? Is there a type of cooler that you like more? Material includes a hood for their neck. Yeah, I think so. The question is, what type of coolers, materials, and such? Definitely the more wool, that kind of stuff. Wool coolers are dang expensive. Nothing against the manufacturers, but if they're going to make a good one, it's expensive to make. I think a good one, you can find wool blankets even at Walmart, cheaper wool blankets, and then go buy a couple of clamps. Just go up to Canadian Tire or Home Depot or Home Depot or whatever, and put some clamps on there. You clamp them under their neck. I like a cooler that comes right up to their ears, right over their tail. They're huge, they're big. Some horses, they'll get in a little trouble with them. They'll dance around the cross ties, and they might step on them and rip them every once in a while, and then I just take a scissors and trim them off. But the bigger ones are definitely better because you're trying to keep everything warm, keep the legs warm, keep everything you possibly can. If they have like a sculpted neck with some Velcro, those are very nice. We have some of them, but they're expensive. So my go-to is just great big rectangular ones, and you just clamp them under their necks here. And for me, the other thing that works really well too is I will put, let's say it's a young horse and I know they're going to mess around in the cross ties while I'm on other horses. I'll leave them in the cross ties with one of those big coolers on, and then I'll cover it in a sheet with leg straps and everything. And then them babies can't mess around and they can't grab it and pull it off, and then they get underneath their legs and they wreck them. Just have a big sheet. So like on, let's say, a reigning 2-year-old, which would normally take like a 74 type sheet, I'll have like a 78 or an 80, and I'll put that on there. It's huge, but it fits over the cooler and it just kind of hugs everything in there. And then after like half an hour, I'll switch that to a different cooler that's dry, and then they can go from there. As far as brands, there's a bunch of good ones. I guess over the years we've just kind of buy them. Usually I end up buying them because I forget mine at home when I'm at a horse show, and then I have to go to the tack store that's there and I buy them. So I just buy whatever I can. But definitely the more wool that you can get in them, I think, is the best. And the bigger, you want to cover up as much of that body as possible. Don't let those necks freeze, and don't let their butts freeze either. Both of those muscle groups, I think, are way more important. Everybody thinks about that back and they kind of forget the other stuff. There's lots of good companies that have them, and they kind of go that way. I feel like a lot of that stuff is just, especially in the wintertime, is go a little overboard on them. Everybody says, oh, I got one cooler or whatever. Well, buy 3 of them. Anything you can think of when it's cold, go overboard on them. And I think on the opposite side too. If it's hot out, middle of summer, I think we kind of forget too. If I think a horse needs electrolytes because they're maybe just, a little struggling on the drinking and stuff, go overboard on them. Get those things everything they need. Whenever there's excessive weather, don't go halfway on anything. Get those things cooled off really quick. Get those things, in the wintertime, keep them warm, and keep them going. They can go back outside, they can, but make sure they're completely dry. Not, well, they're kind of dry, it'll be okay. Common ones we do here with our lesson horses. We just got done some lessons here. It's getting cooler, like it's about -3. And sometimes I leave my lesson horses that stay outside 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But if they're a little bit wet, they can stay inside for the night. And we'll kick them back out in the morning. If, they're dry to put in a stall, but I don't want to put them back out where it's really, really cold, they're going to stay in. I feel like you really go overboard on anything you think. Don't chintz out when it comes to cold weather, because colds cost a lot of money to fix in horses, and it's going to happen. But boy, take everything you can and really push on it. So I think the big thing for tonight is that there's no perfect scenario. If it's wet, get them dry. Stay warm yourself. Buy good gloves, buy good socks. I've seen a bunch of people with the electric vests now. I'm not going to lie, I've been looking into one of those. Keep my back warm. And I think that's a big thing. People get cold, they're going to hurt their lower back, and you're going to hurt your horse's lower backs. Keep that warm, keep it where it's supposed to be. And just do anything you do to your horse. Make sure, whatever you do to yourself, do to your horse. You don't want to be cold and wet. You don't want to do any of that stuff. Go overboard. If it involves wearing a cooler while you're riding them, make sure they're used to it, but go do it. They can ride around with a little bit of a cooler, all that kind of stuff, and keep them riding them. It's definitely good for them, and it's good for you. Nothing worse than trying to take up something in the spring. We see it all the time. Everybody comes out for their first rides in the spring, and the joints are creaking and cracking on horse and human, and they just need to keep doing it all winter long. I'm going to wrap this up. Thanks, everybody, for listening to me. Sorry I didn't have the better half and the much better half to look at than me sitting in here. But she's unwell, so hopefully she'll be back next week. Any questions, you can send it to her. Or if you just want to tell her what a great job I did, you can always send it to her, or submit questions or other topics to hayescofellph@gmail.com. And just send her a message. Just bombard her with messages saying how a great job I did talking all by myself. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next Tuesday, and hopefully there'll be 2 of us.